Hello, we're at about the top of the hour. I'm going to give everybody another minute or two to join, and then we'll kick things off. So we'll give it another minute or two, and we'll jump right into it. All right, I think we can get rolling. Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to our webinar on storage trends for 2021 and beyond. My name is Rick Kutzapel. I'm a member of the board of directors of the SCSI Trade Association. I'm also a product planner within Broadcom. And joining me today, I have two of the industry's most respected personalities. And I'll let them do their introductions. Jeff?
Thank you, Rick. My name is Jeff Janukwitz, and I manage IDC's coverage around storage and memory. IDC is a leading market research firm where we have over 1,000 analysts worldwide. We cover everything from PCs to enterprise storage to servers to mobile phones. And on my team, which looks at storage and memory, we have someone who looks at the HDD market, someone who looks at NAND and DRAM. And for my part, I look at the SSD market for the most part of the time. I've had the opportunity to be at IDC for the last 14 years and come with a background in both storage as well as semiconductors. So it's been a great fit for what we do around SSDs. Chris?
Yeah, I'm Chris Primesberger. I'm the editor of eWeek. And actually, I'm in kind of parallel to Jeff. Well, first of all, we both have long last names, so that takes care of that. I've been at eWeek for 16 years, not editor the whole time, but I started out as the storage reporter back in 2005, right before the cloud came into play, as we know it. eWeek has been around since 1984. At first, we were PC Week for a long time. We were a weekly newspaper about tech. And then we changed over to eWeek in 2000. The magazine at the time was large and thick and heavy, and it used to fall on your porch with a loud noise back then. We ended up stopping the publication of our magazine in 2011, but we've been online since 2000. And we cover all the same topics that Jeff just mentioned to you, only closer. How's that? And our publisher now is, we were Ziff Davis for many years, and then Quinn Street, and then last year an upstart young publisher called Technology Advice based in Nashville bought us, and they've been investing in us, and we're just excited about being with them. It's been a year now, so that's where we are at eWeek.
Awesome, great, thanks you guys. Yeah, so this forum is going to be kind of a roundtable discussion between us. We have a number of topics that we're going to cover. We're scheduled for 45 minutes. We plan on about 30 minutes of actual discussion with then 15 minutes reserved for Q&A. If you do have questions, there is a ask a question box, I believe, underneath the presenter window. Please go ahead and enter your question into there. We'll try to get we'll try to address the questions, you know, in the appropriate section, but I'm not sure I can actually coordinate all that. We'll surely try to get to them at the end. Anything we don't get to in this session, then we'll follow up on a blog like we have on previous webinars. Bright Talk also has a polling feature. We're going to try that out today. So I have two different polling questions. So during the appropriate section, I will tell you that I'm going to launch the poll, introduce the poll, and please respond. If you are in full screen mode, you'll have to toggle out of full screen mode so that you can see the poll, and then you just toggle right back in. So with that, I think we can jump right into things. So the first topic that we wanted to cover today is the use of SaaS, and specifically the SaaS infrastructure in the enterprise and hyperscale data center architectures. And I'm gonna start the first poll at this time so you can see it. And the question is, what do you think will be the most widely used drive storage interface in the enterprise 3 years from now? So I will start that poll. And you know, I'll turn this one to Jeff. Jeff, I know you and your team studies this pretty carefully. You keep a close eye on it. Do you have any comments on this one?
Yeah, Rick, absolutely. So obviously, you know, we do spend a lot of time looking at enterprise market, kind of what's going on with the OEMs, but also in the hyperscale, particularly some of the large cloud service providers. So it is interesting, right? And I know the world's been dealing with the pandemic. And when we step back and look at it, the pandemic has really sort of accelerated a lot of digital transformation. And, you know, at IDC, we use that term digital transformation, and you know, we've discussed that now for a while. But COVID really has ushered in kind of an urgency around digital transformation, around people looking for efforts to add agility to their workforce, contactless customers, automated business operations. And this is really accelerating not only, you know, efforts in the overall enterprise, but more and more towards sort of cloud-centric technologies and consumption models. And it's also, particularly for the enterprise market, obviously generating large amounts of data storage. So when we step back and really think about it, you know, the enterprise is really continuing to grow at a pretty rapid clip. And, you know, here's our view, at least in terms of, you know, how we see the overall enterprise storage capacity going. And this comes from our recent forecasts for both hard disk drives as well as solid state drives, some work that we had done back in the December timeframe. And here what we're doing is we're actually looking at the amount of storage capacity shipped into the enterprise through some of the various storage technologies, whether it's HDD or SSD. And I think the interesting thing here is as you can see, the SAS infrastructure really does remain the majority of capacity shipments over the next couple of years. So I know SAS has obviously been around for decades, and we continue to see it to grow actually over the next couple of years. And in particular, you know, as you can see here on some of the HDD side of things, where we are seeing the movement towards higher capacity drives, 10, 14. In recent quarters, we've seen 16 terabyte drives, and 18 terabyte drives are all on the horizon. And a lot of that is really what's driving some of the growth that you see here around the SAS infrastructure. You also see, you know, on the SSD side here on some of this chart, clearly we have seen some movement on the SSD side towards NVMe and PCIe, and we clearly do see that growing over the next couple of years. But we also see both SATA and SAS SSDs continuing around for quite some time.
And so Jeff, I think it's important, you know, for everybody to understand that it's the SAS infrastructure that enables not only the SAS, you know, HDDs, but also the SAS SSDs, SATA HDDs, and SATA SSDs, right? So bottom line is it's a very important technology, you know, for, you know, the enterprise moving forward for some time to come.
Yeah, absolutely, right. I mean, and then I think that's what, you know, our analysis is showing here on this chart, which is, hey, when we look at all these things as they start to come together, clearly SAS, you know, not only has it been the mainstay for a number of years, you know, looking backwards, but even looking forward, right, we continue to see it being a very vital technology for overall data infrastructure.
Yeah, these things don't change all that quickly. They take time. Companies have to, when they make a change like this, it's a major change in their data center, and they want to be sure it's right. And if it's working okay, like SATA and SAS have been doing for years in various use cases, you know, there's no hurry. However, it's incumbent upon, you know, the IT managers and the CTOs, CIOs in some cases, to know what's coming from in the future, so that they can be ready to make a move and upgrade if necessary. But right now, a lot of people are not in a hurry to do this.
Yeah, no, I agree, Chris. It's interesting. So I'm looking at the poll results, and I'm not sure if the audience can see the poll results or not, but what it came down to is 77% indicated that NVMe would be the most broadly deployed in 3 years. And and then SAS and SATA, that combination would be then based on the SAS infrastructure, and based on Jeff's data and this discussion on the long tails in the enterprise. I think this is kind of surprising to a lot of people that SAS will be the dominant infrastructure in the foreseeable future. Any comments, you guys? I mean, right? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, clearly, again, from our perspective, and a lot of the data we shared, right, is from the HDD side, which is very capacity driven. We do see NVMe, on some of the SSDs, and we'll touch on some of this, I think in a little bit later through some of the conversation around, what's going on in NVMe and some of the client market. But we do see, again, in some of the SSD side of things where NVMe, is growing as a percentage of the mix in the enterprise. In fact, if we were to look just at SSDs, it actually shipped the majority of SSD petabytes in 2019. But again, like you said, Rick, SAS is still a very important part of that conversation as well.
Right, and I don't think anybody disagrees that there are big advancements in NVMe. There's a lot of innovation in NVMe, right? But to Chris's comment, right? This is tried and true infrastructure, and it's going to be really hard to change from it. Will it someday? Probably, but for the foreseeable future, I think we're SAS. All right. So I think we did a good job on that one. The next topic that we have lined up is around value SAS, and it's the overall value proposition of value SAS in server storage. And so let me talk a little bit about value SAS. It's a relatively new term that is gaining more and more notoriety, and it's really revolves around the price performance gap that we're seeing between SAS and SATA SSDs, right? I mean, it does exist. I don't think anybody's going to disagree with that. But it's also to deal with some of the shortcomings that that are prevalent in SATA within complex topologies. So the concept is to bring the reliability and enterprise attributes of SAS. Like QDEP, spin up, multiple initiators, error recovery, things like that are native to SAS, and bring that into the enterprise server and data centers while at the same time addressing the cost and power expectations of those markets. Jeff, I know you've looked into this. You're familiar with this concept. Any comments on that?
Yeah, Rick, absolutely. And it's interesting, right? And I think to the poll question, right? A lot of people, see the future and think NVMe, but there is a lot of innovation still in SAS, and this idea of value SAS is certainly in that vein, right? Because like we just discussed, right? Most of today's data centers, whether they're very large or very small, utilize a SAS-based RAID to provide kind of the performance and fault tolerance that are necessary for most of today's kind of 24/7 enterprise infrastructures, right? And when we look at SATA, effectively it's peaked in terms of its performance, and there really are no future speed improvements, at least planned, right? So at least beyond sort of where we're at now, which is 12 gigabits per second, right? So value SAS certainly can come in and provide some improvements there in terms of higher bandwidth, some greater throughput, some improvements over where 6 gig SATA actually is today, right? And at the end of the day, you're right in terms of the price performance aspect of things. Certainly can come in and add some additional value there. And the real value that I think a lot of end users ultimately start to see is that improvement in terms of performance helps to unleash a lot of the bottlenecks that can crop up within an existing system, right? Where it may be preventing the CPU from reaching its full operational performance. So having a new, I don't want to say necessarily a new tier, but having a new class of SaaS product, which is really optimized for servers, for single port design, that does bring in a new price point, we think has some pretty compelling options out there for a lot of end users.
How about, Jeff, how about capacity for value SaaS? Are there advantages with value SaaS in terms of the huge influx of data that keeps pouring into these coffers? The reason I ask that is because CFOs are going to perk up at the word value SaaS, and they're going to look at that. But is there any advantage?
Well, sure. It kind of comes back to that comment I made around, unleashing some of the bottlenecks, right? And what we really want to do is have an optimized system. And, if the 6 gig in terms of SATA is acting as that bottleneck, clearly moving to something, that's going to perform a little bit better has, what I think a lot of people want to do. And, if we do look back, SaaS, a lot of the SaaS, at least SSDs, have historically been dual ported. They've tended to be, relatively high price compared to where SATA is. So anything that can be done to sort of optimize that price point to make it a little bit closer to SATA, plus give folks that value in terms of giving some additional performance benefits, is clearly something that I think a lot of people are going to be interested in, especially if they're not willing to kind of make the jump, at least today, in terms of looking at some of the newer systems or more higher performing systems that may be NVMe based.
Okay, thanks.
No, good discussion. I liked it. So with that, let's move to the next one. We have another topic, and this one is around the fact that NVMe is replacing SATA SSDs in client platforms. And so I guess before we dive into it, let me define what I mean by client, because I think a definition is warranted. So in this discussion, client is everything that's not enterprise and data center, right? So it could be inclusive of mobile, laptops, desktops, things like that. So not enterprise. And so Chris, I know that you and your publication, you watch these types of trends very carefully, right? So this is a big trend, and it is happening.
Yeah,
Comments?
there's no question about it. Just to kind of set the table here, the non-volatile media solid state disks are replacing, excuse me, enterprise SATA SSDs and servers, and the momentum is really gathering speed. And there are some good reasons for that. First of all, I mean, obviously performance is one of them, and it's largely the best reason to advance into NVMe in a data center situation. The second advantage would be mainstream availability, because it does fit into systems pretty quickly and easily using those cards. NVMe also monopolizes SSD deployments, so that is something that's a real advantage for an administrator, storage administrator. And right now, the enterprise SATA is in a decline. I mean, they're still out there. A lot of them are still working fine, but like we said before, I mean, CTOs and CIOs who are in charge of these systems need to know what's coming down the pike, and they know they need to be educated when it comes to the non-volatile media, solid state disks. And then the future cloud data center architectures are going to be based on these. There's no question about it. And like our poll mentioned earlier, I mean, a high percentage of people who are with us today on this telecast or on this cast believe the same thing. And NVMe is eventually going to be taking over, maybe not 3 years, maybe 5 years, but at least down the road. That looks like the future right now. And it seems to be pretty inevitable. I don't know, Jeff, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And clearly we've watched NVMe for a long time, right? And I was looking back, and really the first spec around NVMe came out in 2011, right? So we're talking almost 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So it's been around for a while, but it has taken, you know, some time to actually mature and become more widely available. And really one of the first areas where we see it, you know, gaining some broader traction is actually sort of in the, you know, what we call is the client market. So this is in the PC market. And when you look at, you know, PCs and kind of what the workload is, you know, they are relatively light in terms of, you know, what the workload is, especially when you compare it versus sort of what happens in a, you know, kind of a traditional enterprise server and the like. So a few years ago, at least in the client market, you know, enterprise NVMe shipments were pretty small. But if we look, you know, today, just like I mentioned a little earlier, in 2019, we actually saw NVMe shipments in the client market actually start to outpace SATA you know, for PCs. However, and you know, if we want to pull up the next slide, you know, when you look at it in the context of, you know, where the client market is in conjunction with the overall enterprise market, yeah, we're shipping, you know, north of 300 million PCs a year. And, you know, we've seen that market transition, you know, quickly over to NVMe, at least relatively speaking. But if you put it in the context of, you know, some of the data that I'm sharing with you here, and this is something that comes from our, you know, our global DataSphere product, and this is actually from our global storage sphere, where we look at the installed base of storage by some, you know, different applications and the like. And, you know, clearly you see PCs on there, and there's, you know, a fair amount of installed base around PCs, as you all might imagine. But if you do look at that enterprise market that we touched on earlier, or Chris, that you know, you were kind of getting into, right? Mm-hmm. The vast majority of that is still where, you know, all the petabytes are. And, you know, one of the reasons, you know, we've seen NVMe take off earlier in places like the PC market is, you know, the workloads and a lot of the requirements aren't necessarily as strict as that we would tend to see in some of the enterprise market. So, you know, we are seeing that transition, and I think, like the poll mentioned earlier, you know, that's ultimately going to happen. But there are some differences between, you know, what a client NVMe drive is versus what we tend to see in some of the enterprise market.
Yeah, and you know, I want to comment on that. I was gonna ask for your opinion on that, Jeff. You know, the chasm, if you will, between the client expectations and the enterprise expectations, right? I mean, it's just all storage, right? What's the big difference? Well, you know, some of the expectations are really extreme on the enterprise, and I think that's a big difference that has to be taken into account.
Yeah, and absolutely right. One of the first things, you know, I remember, you know, when I got into looking at SSDs was the whole idea of endurance, right? Which is, you know, how can something that wears out be put into, you know, a PC where I'm reading and writing all the time, or let alone into some of the enterprise storage market where, you know, I'm doing a lot of I/O. You know, when you look at, you know, just simplistically on the endurance side, a lot of the client endurance, right? You're not reading and writing your PC quite as much. Whereas a server, we tend to see servers, you know, they can have 1, 3, 5, 10 drive writes per day and some of those kinds of things. And those are some of the differences when we step back and think about, you know, kind of the difference between a client drive versus an enterprise SSD that are there. There's obviously some fundamental things in terms of how they're designed, in terms of what performance metrics and their latency requirements as well. But there's most certainly a difference between, you know, each one of those different types of drives.
Yeah, remember when SSDs first came out? I mean, there was a lot of doubt as to whether these things would last and how long they would last in an enterprise situation. But I'll tell you, the companies, the fabs who are making these, they are really adding the strength and endurance to these solid state drives now that I don't think we could have imagined 10 years ago.
Agreed. All right. So let me move us on to the final topic, and that is around 24 gig SAS. And so I want to start the last poll at this point. If I can, oh, there we go. If I can figure out how to do it. And this is a little broader question, and just to try to get a feeling for how well different people and, you know, on this webinar understand the benefits of 24 gig SAS. So I've opened the poll. So, go ahead and take a run at it. But, I think sometimes there's a little misconception about these things. 24 gig SAS is really the latest evolution of a 20-year legacy that we have in serial attached SCSI. Today, much of the storage ecosystem is investing in 24 gig SAS, and we've seen numerous products already be announced, and there's a lot of collaboration, a lot of joint testing going on. So there's a lot of work being done. We're seeing some of the end users start to invest in this technology, designing systems, developing systems around that. And the SCSI Trade Association is working on an industry-wide Plugfest to be able to do an interoperability event, and we would do this in conjunction with the University of New Hampshire's Interoperability Lab. And right now we're earmarking it for the middle of this year. We're hoping to kick off test planning here very, very shortly. And this would be in preparation for system level deployments in the early to mid 2022 timeframe. So let me, so Jeff, I know you watch a lot of this technology, and I know this is awfully forward looking, but what's your take on 24 gig SAS?
Yeah, well, again, it sort of comes back to that comment I made earlier around sort of innovation, right? And this is just, another area where we're seeing, I would say, some innovation around the SAS ecosystem. And, I know from my perspective, right, I mean, clearly, you can leverage a lot of the legacy that is around SAS and provide some new benefits, specifically on the SSD side, right? We did see some announcements from some of the SSD vendors around 24 gig. Really last year, right? So a lot of those products, I think, as you noted, right, are starting to come into fruition. But I'm curious, from your side, right? I mean, we see, a lot of activity there, but maybe you can help us understand a little bit more sort of what's new with 24 versus maybe, kind of where we're at today.
Yeah, no, and that's a good question, because we're at 12 gig today. 12 gig has been in production for quite some time. And at 24 gig, we're taking, a pretty innovative look at technology in general, right? The overall objective of 24 gig SAS was to double the effective bandwidth of 12 gig. And so to do that, we start to get to data rates that are, extremely, extremely high, right? And so to be able to maintain the reliability and the enterprise expectations like we were talking about previously, we had to add some extra features in 24 gig. So things like forward error correction, right? So we can correct 2 bits of errors, 2 bits worth of errors in a packet. Continuous adaptation. So instead of training your SerDes or your PHYs at start of day, we train on continuously train on live data to take into account any changes in the environment, whether it's temperature or voltage, things like that. To make sure that we have the optimum channel, the optimum settings to drive that channel. Again, to make sure that we're as optimum as possible. There are a number of other things, other features that go along with 24 gig SAS that aren't specific to 24 gig itself. Intercepting technologies like SMR, hybrid SMR, multi-actuator. So there's a lot of innovation going on even above the physical layer, that will come into prime time at 24 gig.
Yeah, no, right. And I think a lot of those things that you just touched on, right? I mean, those are the kinds of things, at least particularly from my side, right? When people look to, future storage needs, right? That checks a lot of boxes, I think, for a lot of people, especially, given kind of where you are with the SAS infrastructure.
Right, and to be fully noted that 24 gig SAS is backwards compatible not only to 12 gig SAS, but also to 6 gig SAS, and then probably more importantly 6 gig SATA. Right, so it spans that gamut to qualify as that infrastructure.
Yeah, data center managers are going to love to hear that, because they'll be able to use some of their legacy equipment. I was just going to ask, just kind of throw up a quick toss-up question to both of you. Is this kind of similar to the connectivity world where 5G is coming in and making huge changes over the next few years? Is it similar to that in some ways, or what? The 24 gig?
So I guess, Jeff, I'll take it, and then, you can, I'd like to hear your response. I don't see it as revolutionary as 5G per se. I see it as an evolutionary step, leveraging, 6 gig, 12 gig, but also, innovating on top of that to make sure that we have those enterprise expectations covered. Right, that's really important, because just to go faster, okay, it checks that box. But if you can't do it reliably or over, a 19-inch channel or whatever, it's going to be pretty limited in its use.
Thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah, and I guess the only thing I'd add, and actually, Rick, I think your choice of words is right. I think it is just sort of more evolutionary in terms of what it's intended to do. But again, you go back to that chart I shared earlier, which is, hey, there's a very large amount of the infrastructure still really based around SCSI in terms of where those petabytes are going to be. Clearly, I think a lot of, server storage and customers, CIOs, right, they want to have some kind of path or assurance that, there are some future upgrades that are coming down the pipe. And, it's great to see the evolution of that and have 24 gig, at least, as an option for folks that want to go down that path.
Yep, agreed.
How far along? Real quickly, how far along is 24G in development?
So that's a good question, right? The spec is done, and like I said, most of the major players are investing in it today. Products have been announced. Jeff referenced some of those. We've seen a number even lately. Plugfest coming this summer, and we're expecting to see server shipments in 2022. So, I mean, it's a busy time. It's a hectic time, but we're taking the challenge on. I think everybody's pretty excited about it.
Good, thank you.
Yep. So if we're done with that one, I can switch to the questions, because we do have a whole bunch of questions. We're probably not going to get to them all. So I'll go through them. I was trying, so I have to apologize. I was trying to go through them while we were chatting on the individual topics, but I'm not quick enough on my feet to be able to pick out the ones relevant to that topic and ask them. So I pushed them to the end. So so what's after 24 gig SAS, right? And so I'll take that one. That's a good question. There's right now just say naturally it must be 48 gig, a speed bump. Right now it's not clear that a speed bump is necessary. But I think, if you step back and look at it, there's still a lot of room for innovation within the SCSI stack. It's not just the physical layer. The physical layer is the one that people can relate to. Oh, it's faster, right? But there's still a lot of features and functionality that can be added on top of that physical layer, with the architecture of the SCSI stack, whether it's at the protocol layer, the block layer. And those are happening real time. We're at T10's having meetings on a regular basis, and there's a lot of innovations. I touched on some with SMR, multi-actuator. There's still a lot of innovation going on. So I think stay tuned on that one. Boy, and the questions are coming in as I speak. Where does NVMe HDD and 25 gig Ethernet HDD fit in?
I'll take a little bit of a stab at that.
Okay.
It's a little still unclear, just generally speaking, in terms of how that's going to happen. But, over time, I mentioned, at least in the enterprise market, right? On the SSD side, clearly we're seeing NVMe move into the majority of the shipments over there. And, SSDs are growing as a percentage of the overall, shipments and petabytes, as we look out over time. However, right now we're talking about trying to mix in, say, a storage array or in a system, right? Having NVMe, having SCSI, and some of those kinds of things. And clearly there's SCSI-based, SSDs and HDDs. And with that transition on SSDs, it's sort of a natural maybe question to say, hey, what about maybe putting the NVMe interface on HDDs? Now, you obviously don't necessarily need it for, all the performance reasons or the optimizations around non-volatile media, why NVMe was introduced. But there are some initiatives. I know there's some things underway from OCP in terms of looking at NVMe-based HDDs. But they're still relatively early on, at least from my perspective, in terms of where they sit. In terms of their development, but there are some, definitely some activities underway that are looking at that as well.
This tells me that storage admins really have to be up to date on all these things, and they have to be knowledgeable about what each of these does and how it fits into their enterprise system. I mean, it's incumbent upon them to be up to date on everything. So they should be reading what Jeff writes and what eWeek writes, right?
There you go. Good plug. From my perspective, I'm seeing, a surge in NVMe HDD energy, work within OCP, et cetera, over the Ethernet side. My concern is with NVMe HDDs is the amount of, work that still has to be done to make them realizable in an enterprise environment. And that's mainly standards work that needs to get done. Because I think people forget, it's not just taking, some media and putting an NVMe interface in front of it, right? It's, how do you, all the drive-in queries then have to get mapped to NVMe. How do you manage enterprise, large scale spin up? I mean, that's a challenge in SCSI and SAS today, right? And that has to be addressed in NVMe. So I think it's an exciting time. I think there are a lot of good possibilities, but it's the amount of work can be underestimated sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the next question I'm seeing, from a trend perspective, could you discuss the adoption of SAS, SATA, and NVMe in all-flash arrays?
Sure. So I'll take a stab at that, and then if you guys also want to touch in on that. So clearly we've seen a lot of investment in terms of all-flash arrays, and we've seen pretty rapid growth over the last couple of years in terms of that category of storage array. To the point, if we just look backwards last year, so 2020, about 40% of the spending on external storage was on all-flash arrays. So we've already seen a fair amount of that. And the reality is, if you look at that today, the vast majority of those are really still, SAS-based SSDs. And there clearly has been some new announcements from a lot of the large storage providers around NVMe based arrays. I think we've seen it pretty much from all the leading providers, whether it's Dell EMC, NetApp, Pure Storage, IBM, etc. Right? They've all talked about it. And they've really already started to introduce some of those AFAs. And we do see NVMe all-flash arrays as a very high growth category over the next couple of years. But right now, they're still targeted primarily at a lot of the higher end and more performance-oriented types of applications. And we're really just starting to see them move down into more, I would call it more the mainstream portion of the AFA market, which again, from our perspective, if it was 40% last year, we see it, growing as an overall category to about 50% of the overall spend on external storage by 2023. So, clearly a lot going on there as well.
Yeah, we see it being used a lot, and they started off being used a lot in the financial services sector, the sciences, government, military, etc. But they are, like Jeff said, they are working their way downstream into enterprise and medium to large enterprise systems also.
Yep. No, a good point. One of my question with AFAs is always about, with NVMe and all flash arrays is around scalability, right? I know there's a lot of work going on NVMe over fabrics, but I mean, you go back and look at the amount of computational resources, memory, system resources that it takes to be able to scale these things. I think there's still some pretty big challenges, ahead of NVMe all flash arrays. I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but just challenges noted, right?
Yeah, well, like you said, there's plenty of room for innovation. I think everybody here said that. Plenty of room for innovation everywhere at all levels.
Yeah, and I mean, hard things have been, the ecosystem have solved hard problems in the past, right? I mean, back in the day, somebody said, well, if you're going to do SAS, we should make sure that you can use SATA drives in a SAS infrastructure. And, that was almost dismissed as a crazy idea. Why would anybody want a SATA drive in an enterprise deployment, right? I mean, it's nonsense. And, now fast forward 20 years or however, my calendar might not be right. But it's, SATA's, a big part of the enterprise. And we the enterprise or the ecosystem, we figured out how to deal with a lot of those things.
You do what you have to do when you're in the industry.
Mother of necessity, right? Here's a good one. I can take this one. How do you plan to execute a 24 gig SAS PlugFest in light of the pandemic and continued travel restrictions? So this is a big challenge, right? So we're ready for a PlugFest. We have a pandemic. Nobody really was planning for this, and so the SCSI Trade Association and T10, frankly, we've been thinking about this and trying to get creative. So we are working in conjunction with the University of New Hampshire's Interoperability Lab to try to put something together. And I consider it a hybrid version. So we used to do PlugFest. PlugFests were all in person at a location, traditionally at University of New Hampshire's Interoperability Lab. Everybody would go there. Everybody would test all together, be all on top of each other in the same lab. And that's not going to happen. Not only, UNH has requirements, all the different companies have travel restrictions, things like that. So then we started thinking, well, maybe we should do a virtual one. NVMe has a concept of a virtual PlugFest. So maybe we do something like that. And the problem with the first PlugFest of this nature is it's very hands-on, very physical, right? You got your trace, you're going to generate traces, you're going to be tweaking firmware, you're going to be looking at signals. It doesn't fit the virtual model very well. So what we're trying to do is our proposal is we're calling it a hybrid model. So we're working with University of New Hampshire to come up with a test plan between T10 and UNH, and then we will be doing testing at different sites based on the test plan. So we'll implement this test plan and then report our results back to UNH, where they'll be gathered and then distributed as appropriate. So we're working very hard to try to figure out how to get this done, because it's a very important part of deploying this technology.
Good.
Let me see. Comment on how to get the best performance of NVMe Gen 3 or Gen 4 with spec of CPU, memory, and NIC. I'm not sure. We might have to take that one offline and digest that one.
That one's above my pay grade.
Yeah. How do you differentiate between M.2 SSDs and NVMe in client system deployments? So let me take that, and then you guys can comment. So inherently there are different, the SoCs or the controllers on these devices are very different. So there are enterprise class M.2 drives. So the form factor doesn't necessarily, preclude it from fitting into one of these categories, while M.2 is more designed to the client. It's not a hard and fast thing. Typically, it's the traditional 2.5, 3.5 inch form factors. I know 3.5 inches more HDD, where they're hot swappable, things like that. I don't know. You guys have comments, relative to the form factor?
Well, I guess what I'd say, I mean, Rick, you're pretty much spot on, right? There are some differences, at the SoC level, some power fail protection, some of those kinds of things I think are pretty common. But, one of the other things, right, there does tend to be a different firmware load a lot of times for a lot of the enterprise class. I touched on endurance, so, a lot of times there can be some differences there in terms of how how those drives are designed. But, when we step back, you're right, if the question's about form factors, we really are at an interesting point around form factors because, historically, we've always been, dictated by, HDD form factors, and that's sort of by disk diameter. But as Flash has kind of grown, right, we've kind of seen this proliferation of a lot of new form factors. M.2 is obviously one that was maybe originally designed for some of the client market, has found its way into a lot of enterprise applications. But when we look a little bit further back, right, there's a lot of new form factors. E1 short, so kind of a sort of a slightly variant off M.2, but more enterprise optimized, is out there and on the roadmap. But we also see some other ones and out there like E1 long, so a longer version of these. There's also U.3 and some other kinds of things, which are obviously pretty interesting in terms of new ways to optimize around some of the new storage media, i.e., SSDs and solid state, right?
Right. Yeah. Without the mechanicals of the old SATA, I mean, gosh, these things can fit in anywhere, and admins and and IT buyers of hardware and software for storage have so many choices right now. So it's the sky's the limit right now. It seems like. Yep.
Agreed. You know what, we're running a little bit long. I just want to tackle one more question, then we'll follow up the rest in one of our blogs. And this question, considering the lack of 24 gig adoption, is NVMe takeover sooner than 3 to 5 years? I mean, that's a very logical question. I think that people that aren't like in the ecosystem, in the here and now, that are watching this from above might not be seeing the 24 gig adoption. Right now there is a lot of investments at the system level, well at the system level and the subsystem level on NVMe, on 24 gig SAS. There are multiple adapter vendors, same as there's been in the past, in 12 gig. And from the media side, there are numerous drive vendors, with drives sampling today. One's been announced. So I think this is I think some people are going to be shocked at how of the 24 gig adoption, and that's going to start coming to light, with the Plugfest, with some big demos and press announcements as products get ready to launch. So I guess I would say stay tuned for that one, because I think some people are going to be pretty surprised. So. And so with that, guys, I think we're a little bit over time. I keep getting notices on my screen from Bright Talk, so I think we should wrap it up. I really appreciate the time, you guys. I thought this was an awesome discussion. I think some good back and forth, and I look forward to another discussion with you guys.
Okay,
great. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thanks, Rick and Jeff. See you.
Bye, guys.
All right. Bye-bye.